World Bank's international financial corporations have been accused of funding projects that leave behind a trail of destruction, and that emanates from a question that was asked, rather, being to what extent does private investment help developing countries to reduce conflict and violence and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals? We speak to Professor Brian Ganson. He's the head of the Center of Conflict and Collaboration at Stellenbosch University that undertook extensive research on this subject. Thank you very much, Prof, for your time this afternoon. Maybe let's start with how the research was conducted. What were you looking for?
Well, we've known for some time that individual projects of the IFC, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, and other development finance institutions financing private development, are conflict prone. And we wanted to see how widespread that is. Are those the exceptions or are they the rules? So we took the IFC and we did the first comprehensive study of all of their projects that we could geolocate around the world.
You asked whether they're the exceptions or the rules, and you focused on the periods from 1994 to 2024. Why did you choose the IFC?
We chose the IFC because, in fact, we have reason to believe, at least from what we're told by the IFC, by others, that they apply higher standards of environmental and social performance, that they take more care in their projects than a private lender does. And so we thought, gee, if the IFC is getting it wrong, probably it's a good sign that most other actors are as well.
Is it safe to say, Prof, from the results of your study that it's no exception, but it is indeed the rule? What's perhaps something pertinent that stood out for you that you'd like to express to our viewers, more so where funding and conflict or the rise in conflict is concerned?
Well, there are a number of findings that we should all receive as disturbing. First of all, the headline finding that on average an IFC project will cause almost 8 armed conflict events, so from violent protest up to a terrorist attack, government repression, in its first year. We can surmise from that these projects a proper foundation has not been laid, that people have not been brought together to buy into the project, its goals, and how it will be carried out. We see a lot of confirmation in our work with respect to pressures on land. Projects that are land intensive are particularly problematic. We see confirmation of a lot of work being done that shows that mega projects where a lot of money is brought into for a community without adequate preparation and planning also tend to exacerbate conflict.
Help us follow the money, Prof. So it will come from the IFC, then it goes to, then it goes to, then it goes nowhere.
Well, so what's happening in most of these cases, right? The IFC sits in Washington and it looks for deals. It operates effectively as a commercial bank, although it's meant to act to higher standards. And so it works with a company, and typically because it's in infrastructure and mining and other things that touch on land and resources, with the government. So you have an elite deal, you have the company, some government officials, and the IFC, and they decide what's good, and then the money goes to the company goes about its business, and I think what we see is that the promised developmental impact and peace impact is never delivered.
You take a look at developments recently on what has now been called the coup belt of West Africa. Nothing funny, but when you reflect on it, because you had international or you had countries outside of the African continent that said, well, we're going to be withdrawing our aid or withholding our aid in the name of wanting a democratic government. And so when we have seen so-called democratic governments, but we have also experienced instability in the form of conflict in some of these countries on the continent, is it such a bad thing that that aid is then recalled?
Well, we need to be asking ourselves, who are we helping and who are we hurting, right? So to the extent that we are saying no to authoritarianism, then probably whether it is aid or whether it is private investment, we should be cautious. The point is, though, not that, we're anti-business or anti-development. Africa is a pro-business environment. We see that in our smallholder farmers and all the people hustling every day to make a living. We're not anti-business, but the question is what kind of business and how we go about developing it. And what we see is increasingly our so-called partners, such as the IFC, are not willing to do the hard work of getting everybody to the table, making sure that safeguards are in place, making sure that there's sufficient consensus for a project, whether an aid project or a private project, to make a positive difference.
Prof, you spoke of land-intensive projects being problematic. How so?
Well, we live on a continent where 60% of the workers in Africa are smallholder farmers. 90% of the land that they farm, there are no formal tenure rights, right? We know that there are a lot of unsettled land claims here in South Africa, across the continent. And therefore, if the IFC or another finance organization comes in and says, hey, we want to finance a plantation, right? The incentive then is for the government to claim that land, push people off, and make it available to a large corporation. That is not the best way for ordinary people to improve their incomes. That's not the best way for us to develop. Just as one example, we see that in mining, we see that in infrastructure projects as well.
Does aid help or hurt Africa in the name of development? Thank you very much, Prof, for your contribution this afternoon.